Julia Lopez wiped her sweaty palms against her black slacks, taking a deep breath as she stood at the entrance of Bellamy Hall, an exclusive venue that hosted some of Philadelphia's most prestigious events. The magnificent crystal chandelier above her seemed to mock her nervousness as she adjusted her white server's shirt for the fifth time. "I cannot believe I let Mia talk me into this," she muttered, tucking a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. Her best friend had called that morning, desperate with a severe case of the flu, begging Julia to cover her catering shift at what was apparently just another boring corporate dinner. Just another boring corporate dinner for an important tech investor that could blacklist Mia if she didn't find a replacement. Just another boring corporate dinner that paid double the normal rate. Julia sighed, the things she did for friendship. "You must be Mia's replacement," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. The catering manager, Vivian, appeared beside her with a clipboard and a critical eye. "I hope you've done this before." "Yes, I worked through college as a server," Julia replied, straightening her posture. What she didn't mention was that her college days were 4 years behind her, and she now taught second grade at Meadowbrook Elementary. Vivian handed her a tray. "Table 7 is your responsibility. Don't make eye contact unless spoken to, refill water glasses before they're empty, and for heaven's sake, don't spill anything on the guests. Some of Philadelphia's wealthiest business people are here tonight." Julia nodded, taking the tray with slightly trembling hands. She could handle 25 rambunctious 8-year-olds on a sugar high, but something about serving the elite made her stomach twist. She made her way through the elegant hall, weaving between tables adorned with fresh orchids and glittering tableware. Table 7 was situated near a floor-to-ceiling window that showcased the Philadelphia skyline twinkling against the night sky. 5 people were already seated, engaged in conversation that halted briefly as she approached. "Good evening," Julia said with her most professional smile. "I'll be your server tonight." 4 of the guests barely acknowledged her with slight nods before resuming their discussion about market trends. But the 5th person, a man sitting at the far end of the table, looked up and met her eyes. The impact was immediate. He had the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen, framed by dark lashes and set in a face that seemed sculpted from marble. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it multiple times, and the slight shadow of stubble on his jaw gave him a rugged edge that contrasted with his impeccably tailored suit. "Thank you," he said simply, but his voice carried a warmth that his companions lacked. Julia felt her cheeks warm as she began pouring water into the crystal glasses. She moved methodically around the table, careful not to disrupt their conversation. "Kingsley is being modest as usual," one of the men was saying. The Kingsley Marine Conservation Foundation just secured a partnership with the United Nations. It's going to revolutionize oceanic research. "It's still in early stages," the blue-eyed man replied, his tone dismissive yet humble. Julia's hand faltered slightly as she reached his glass, processing the name. Everyone in Philadelphia knew of Tyler Kingsley, the marine biologist turned entrepreneur who had made millions with his sustainable ocean technology company before turning 30. His innovations in ocean cleanup technology had transformed him from scientist to millionaire seemingly overnight. As if sensing her recognition, he glanced up again, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Careful," he said softly as water nearly reached the brim of his glass. "Sorry," Julia quickly righted the pitcher, mortified. "No harm done," he assured her throughout the appetizer course. Julia did her best to remain invisible, stepping in to clear plates and refill glasses with practiced efficiency. Yet she couldn't help noticing how Tyler Kingsley seemed different from the others at his table. While they spoke loudly of acquisitions and profit margins, he spoke passionately about coral reef preservation and sustainable fishing practices. When she served the main course, a delicate sea bass with asparagus, he thanked her by name, having clearly read her name tag. "Julia," he said, "could I trouble you for some more water?" The simple act of him using her name shouldn't have affected her so much, but it did. In a room where most guests looked through servers as if they were furniture, being acknowledged as a person felt unexpectedly significant. "Of course, Mr. Kingsley," she replied, careful to maintain her professional demeanor despite the flutter in her stomach. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know who I am," Julia felt her face warm again. "Your reputation precedes you. I read about your work with ocean plastics removal. My second graders did a project on it last semester." "You're a teacher," interest sparked in his eyes. "Yes, at Meadowbrook Elementary." "I'm just filling in for a friend tonight." A woman with a severe bun and an expensive-looking dress cleared her throat pointedly. "Tyler, darling, we were discussing the merger with Atlantic Tech." He nodded politely to the woman before turning back to Julia with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls." As Julia retreated to the kitchen, she chastised herself for the unprofessional exchange. Vivian would have her head if she knew Julia was chatting with one of the VIP guests. Yet she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips or the way her heart had accelerated when he'd shown interest in her real job. "Pull yourself together, Lopez," she muttered as she collected dessert plates. "He's just being polite." When she returned to table 7 with dessert, an elaborate chocolate creation with gold leaf, Tyler was engaged in what appeared to be a tense discussion with the woman who had interrupted them earlier. "Marion, I've told you repeatedly that I'm not interested in selling to Atlantic Tech," he was saying, his voice low but firm. "But darling, think of the possibilities. With their resources and your patents, my technology was created to help the oceans, not to maximize shareholder profits," he replied. "That's not negotiable." As Julia set a dessert plate before him, their eyes met briefly. He offered her a small, tired smile that made her wonder how many of these conversations he endured in a given week. The dinner stretched on for another hour, with speeches and networking. Julia maintained her professional demeanor, despite finding her attention repeatedly drawn to the millionaire environmentalist, who seemed increasingly out of place among the profit-focused businesspeople surrounding him. As the event wound down, guests began to depart. Julia was gathering the last of the glasses from table 7 when she realized Tyler Kingsley was the only one still seated, typing something on his phone. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Kingsley?" she asked, preparing to clear his dessert plate. He looked up and she was struck again by the intensity of his blue eyes. "Actually, yes," he said, putting his phone down. "An honest opinion." Julia blinked in surprise. "About what? Do you think a children's book about ocean conservation would be something your students would enjoy? Something that explains the issues in an engaging way?" It was the last thing she expected him to ask. "Absolutely," she answered without hesitation. "Children naturally care about animals and the environment. The challenge is making the science accessible and the solutions hopeful rather than overwhelming." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I've been thinking too. I'm working with a publisher on a series, but I'd value input from someone who actually works with children." "It sounds like a wonderful project," Julia said sincerely. He seemed to hesitate before reaching into his jacket pocket and extracting a business card. "If you wouldn't mind sharing your educational perspective, I'd appreciate it." Julia accepted the card, feeling the heavyweight cardstock between her fingers. "I'd be happy to help." "Excellent." He stood, and Julia was surprised by his height. He must have been at least 6'2". "I look forward to hearing from you, Miss Lopez." As he walked away, Julia stared at the embossed card in her hand. Had a millionaire really just asked for her professional opinion, and more importantly, was she really considering calling him? The answer, she realized as she slipped the card into her pocket, was an unequivocal yes. 3 days later, Julia sat in her classroom after school, staring at Tyler Kingsley's business card for what felt like the 100th time. She had drafted and deleted at least 5 emails, each one sounding either too formal or too casual in her mind. "Just send something already," she muttered to herself, picking up her phone. Before she could overthink it further, she composed a simple email introducing herself properly and offering her assistance with his children's book project. To her surprise, a response came within 10 minutes. "Miss Lopez, thank you for reaching out. Would you be available to discuss the project over coffee this Saturday? I value your expertise and would appreciate your insights. Tyler Kingsley Jr. read the message 3 times, her heart racing. Was this a business meeting or something more? She reminded herself that a man like Tyler Kingsley, with his wealth and status, probably had women throwing themselves at him constantly. He was clearly just interested in her professional opinion. Still, she couldn't help the flutter of excitement as she replied, accepting his invitation. Saturday arrived with unexpected nervousness. Julia changed outfits 4 times before settling on a casual blue dress that her friend Mia always said brought out her eyes. She arrived at the coffee shop, an artsy independent place in University City, 15 minutes early, only to find Tyler already there, reading something on his tablet. He looked different in casual clothes, more accessible somehow in his simple button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves that revealed tanned forearms. He stood when he spotted her, a genuine smile warming his features. "Julia, thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm and warm, and Julia tried to ignore the little jolt of electricity she felt at the contact. "I ordered a regular coffee, but please get whatever you'd like," he said, gesturing toward the counter. Once she had returned with her latte, they fell into surprisingly easy conversation. Tyler explained his vision for a series of children's books that would make marine conservation engaging and hopeful. "The biggest challenge is making the science accessible without dumbing it down," he said, showing her some preliminary illustrations on his tablet. "Children are smarter than we give them credit for." "That's exactly what I always say," Julia exclaimed, leaning forward enthusiastically. "My second graders constantly surprise me with their capacity to understand complex concepts when they're presented in the right way." As they discussed the project, Julia found herself relaxing. Despite his wealth and accomplishments, Tyler was easy to talk to, thoughtful, attentive, and genuinely interested in her opinions. When she suggested incorporating interactive elements and real-world activities children could do with their families, his eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," he said. "Making it actionable rather than just informative." 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. Their conversation flowed naturally from the book project to their respective careers, and Julia found herself sharing her journey to becoming a teacher and her passion for early education. "I always knew I wanted to teach," she explained. "There's something magical about watching a child grasp a new concept that moment when their eyes light up with understanding." Tyler nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's how I feel about my work too. Most people just see the business side, but for me, it's always been about solving problems and making a difference." As their coffee cups emptied, Julia expected the meeting to end, but Tyler surprised her by asking, "Have you had lunch?" "There's a great little place around the corner if you're hungry." Lunch led to a walk along the Schuylkill River, where Tyler pointed out various bird species and explained the river's ecosystem with infectious enthusiasm. Julia found herself captivated not just by what he was saying, but by the passion with which he said it. "Sorry," he said, catching himself mid-explanation about river pollution levels. "I tend to get carried away." "Don't apologize," Julia replied with a smile. "It's refreshing to meet someone who cares so deeply about something." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Julia felt a connection that transcended their professional discussion. There was something in his gaze, a recognition, perhaps, that made her heart beat faster. The moment was broken by the buzzing of Tyler's phone. He checked it with a frown. "I apologize, but I need to take this. It's my project manager in Costa Rica." As he stepped away to take the call, Julia took a moment to gather her thoughts. Was this actually happening? Was she developing feelings for a man she'd just met? A millionaire, no less. The whole situation felt surreal. When Tyler returned, his expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry, but there's an issue at one of our research sites that I need to address. Can I drive you home?" "That's not necessary," Julia assured him. "I can take the bus." "Please, I insist," he said. "It's the least I can do after taking up your Saturday." His car, a surprisingly modest electric sedan, was parked nearby. As they drove through the city streets, Julia gave directions to her apartment in Fairmount, all too aware of how ordinary her life must seem compared to his. "Thank you again for your insights," Tyler said as he pulled up in front of her building. "Would it be all right if I contacted you again?" "Maybe we could continue this discussion over dinner next week." Julia felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. "I'd like that," she said before she could overthink it. His smile was warm as he reached for his phone. "Let me get your number then." As she walked up to her apartment, Julia couldn't stop the grin spreading across her face. She had just given her phone number to Tyler Kingsley. And unless she was completely misreading the situation, he had just asked her on a date. Mia called that evening, finally recovered from her flu. "So how was covering my shift? Boring as expected," Julia laughed. "Actually, you wouldn't believe what happened." By the time she finished recounting her day, Mia was practically squealing. "Julia, he's interested in you. This is like a movie." "Or he's just being professional," Julia countered, though she couldn't quite convince herself. "He probably consults with lots of teachers for his projects. Does he take all those teachers to lunch and then for romantic walks by the river? Does he insist on driving all of them home?" "Does he ask all of them to dinner?" Mia demanded, when you put it that way. "Exactly. Oh my God, you're dating a millionaire." "I'm not dating anyone," Julia protested. It was one coffee meeting, but Mia wasn't listening. "Wait until I tell everyone that my getting sick led to my best friend meeting Philadelphia's most eligible bachelor." The following week passed in a blur of anticipation. Tyler texted her twice, once to share an article about marine education programs, and once to confirm their dinner for Friday evening. Each message was friendly but professional, leaving Julia wondering if she had imagined the connection between them. By Friday, she had convinced herself that the dinner was purely business-related. She dressed conservatively in black pants and a deep green blouse, pulling her hair back into a simple ponytail. No reason to look like she was trying too hard for what was clearly a professional meeting. When Tyler arrived to pick her up, however, his appreciative glance made her second-guess her assumptions. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The restaurant he took her to wasn't one of Philadelphia's trendy hotspots, as she might have expected, but rather a small, family-owned Italian place tucked away on a quiet street in Bella Vista. The owner greeted Tyler by name and led them to a cozy corner table. "I hope this is okay," Tyler said as they settled in. "Antonio makes the best risotto in the city, and it's quiet enough that we can actually talk." "It's perfect," Julia assured him, charmed by his choice. As they enjoyed their meal, their conversation ranged from educational theory to favorite books to childhood memories. Tyler told her about growing up in a small coastal town in Maine where his love for the ocean began. "My father was a lobster fisherman," he explained. "He taught me to respect the sea and everything in it. When I started seeing the effects of pollution and overfishing firsthand, I knew I had to do something." "Is that when you decided to become a marine biologist?" Julia asked. Tyler nodded. "I was lucky to get a scholarship to study at Penn. The business side came later, almost by accident. I developed a plastic filtration system as part of my graduate research, and suddenly there were investors interested in commercializing it." "And now you're using that success to fund conservation," Julia observed. "It's impressive." "What about you?" he asked, deflecting the compliment. "Was teaching always the plan?" Julia told him about her own childhood in Philadelphia, her parents who had immigrated from Puerto Rico, and her determination to become a teacher despite their hopes that she would pursue a more lucrative career. "They wanted security for me," she explained, "but they've come around. My dad brags about me to everyone now." As they shared tiramisu for dessert, Tyler's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and sighed. "I'm sorry about the interruptions. My team in Japan is dealing with a storm that's affecting our equipment." "It must be difficult having responsibilities across different time zones," Julia said sympathetically. "It can be," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm always on call." He hesitated before adding, "It makes having a personal life challenging." There was something in his tone, a hint of loneliness, perhaps, that touched Julia. Despite his success, she realized that Tyler's life might not be as enviable as it appeared from the outside. "I imagine it would be hard to know who's interested in you for yourself versus your success," she ventured. His eyes met hers, surprise and appreciation evident in his gaze. "Exactly. People see the company and the foundation, but they don't see the person behind them," Julia finished for him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Then Tyler's expression softened. "You know, this is the first time in a long while that I've been able to just be myself with someone." Julia felt a warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm glad," she said softly. After dinner, they walked through the neighborhood, the early autumn evening pleasantly cool. When Tyler reached for her hand, Julia felt a thrill run through her as their fingers intertwined naturally. "I have a confession," he said as they strolled. "I didn't ask you out just to talk about the children's book project," Julia smiled. "I was beginning to suspect that. From the moment you mentioned your students at the catering event, I was intrigued. It's rare to meet someone so genuinely passionate about what they do," says the man who built a multi-million-dollar company based on his passion, Julia teased. Tyler laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Touché." When they reached her apartment building, Julia found herself reluctant for the evening to end. They stood facing each other, still holding hands. "I had a wonderful time," she said. "So did I," Tyler replied, his voice low. He hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I kissed you?" The question, so respectful and earnest, made Julia's heart flutter. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned down, one hand gently cupping her face as their lips met. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, then deepened as Julia responded. When they finally pulled apart, they were both slightly breathless. "I'd very much like to see you again," Tyler said, his blue eyes intense. "I'd like that too," Julia replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Tyler's schedule was unpredictable, with frequent conference calls at odd hours and occasional emergency trips to check on his various projects. Yet he made time for Julia, showing up at her classroom with lunch when she mentioned she was too busy to eat, or sending her thoughtful texts throughout the day. For her part, Julia found herself constantly surprised by Tyler's genuine interest in her work. He asked questions about her teaching methods, remembered the names of her students when she mentioned them, and once even helped her prepare materials for a science lesson on ocean habitats. "You know, for a millionaire, you're pretty good at cutting out cardboard fish," she teased him one evening as they sat on her living room floor surrounded by craft supplies. "I'll have you know that arts and crafts was my best subject in elementary school," he replied with mock seriousness. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Tyler introduced her to his world, gradually taking her to a fundraising gala for his foundation, where she charmed his business associates with her intelligence and wit, bringing her to his waterfront penthouse apartment, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Delaware River. Julia, in turn, shared her world with him, inviting him to a potluck dinner with her fellow teachers, where he happily discussed education policy. Taking him to meet her parents, who were initially intimidated by his wealth but quickly warmed to his unpretentious manner and obvious affection for their daughter. "He looks at you like you hung the moon," her mother whispered to her in Spanish as they cleared the dinner dishes. "Mama," Julia protested, blushing. "It's true," her mother insisted, "and you look at him the same way." The only cloud in their otherwise sunny relationship was Tyler's increasingly demanding schedule. As his company prepared to launch a new initiative for ocean plastic removal, he was pulled into endless meetings and overseas phone calls. "I'm sorry," he apologized one evening when he had to cut their date short for an emergency video conference with investors. "This project is crucial for expanding our cleanup efforts in the Pacific." "I understand," Julia assured him, though she couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment. As the weeks passed, these interruptions became more frequent. Tyler was always apologetic, always promised to make it up to her, but Julia began to wonder if this was what a relationship with him would always be like, constantly sharing him with his work and the world's oceans. The breaking point came 2 months into their relationship, when Tyler had to cancel their plans for a weekend trip to New York at the last minute. "There's a situation with our research vessel in the Galapagos," he explained over the phone, his voice strained. "I need to fly down there tonight." Julia sat on her couch, the weekend bag she'd packed sitting accusingly by the door. "I understand," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Julia," Tyler said, his tone softening, "I know this is asking a lot. My life is complicated. It's fine," she replied automatically. "Your work is important." There was a pause before he spoke again. "Can I come see you when I get back? We should talk." Those words, "we should talk," hung in the air between them, ominous and heavy. "Of course," Julia said, her stomach knotting with apprehension. After they hung up, she stared at the phone in her hand, tears threatening to spill. Was this the beginning of the end? Had Tyler realized, as she was beginning to, that his lifestyle was incompatible with a normal relationship? For the next 3 days, Julia threw herself into work, staying late at school to prepare lesson plans and grade papers, anything to keep her mind occupied. When Tyler texted to say he was back in Philadelphia and asked if he could come over, she felt a mixture of dread and hope. He arrived at her apartment looking tired, his normally impeccable appearance slightly rumpled from travel. When she opened the door, he simply stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of her as if memorizing her features. "I missed you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Julia felt her resolve weakening. "I missed you too." They sat on her couch, the distance between them feeling both physical and emotional. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Julia had come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "Julia, I owe you an apology," he began. "These past few months have been some of the happiest of my life, but I haven't been fair to you. Here it comes," Julia thought, bracing herself for the end. "My life is chaotic," Tyler continued. "The company, the foundation, they demand so much of my time and attention. And I've been trying to figure out how to balance that with what's developing between us." "And," Julia prompted when he paused. Tyler reached for her hand. "And I realized something while I was in the Galapagos, staring at the same ocean that I've dedicated my life to saving. I realized that all my work, all my efforts to protect the environment, they're meaningless if I don't have someone to share my life with." Julia's breath caught in her throat. "I don't want to cancel any more dates or disappoint you anymore," Tyler said earnestly, "so I've made some changes." "What kind of changes?" Julia asked, confusion replacing her dread. "I've promoted my COO to take over day-to-day operations of the company. I'm stepping back to focus on research and development, which has always been my passion anyway. And I've restructured the foundation so that emergencies don't automatically become my emergencies." Julia stared at him in disbelief. "You did all that for us?" Tyler smiled, squeezing her hand. "I did it for me too. I was burning out, trying to be everything to everyone. But yes, a big part of it was realizing that what we have is too important to risk." Tears welled in Julia's eyes. "Tyler, I never wanted you to choose between your work and me." "I'm not choosing," he assured her. "I'm finding balance. Because the truth is, Julia Lopez, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. "I love you too," Julia whispered, her heart feeling too full for her chest. Tyler pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. When they kissed, it felt like a promise of understanding, of compromise, of a future together. 1 year later, Julia stood on the deck of Tyler's research vessel, watching as a group of excited second graders crowded around a touch tank filled with harmless sea creatures. The field trip sponsored by the Kingsley Marine Conservation Foundation had been her idea, bringing children from underserved Philadelphia schools to experience marine science firsthand. "Miss Lopez, look at this starfish," one of her students called excitedly. Julia smiled, making her way over to the tank. "That's an echinoderm," she explained. "It has a special kind of skeleton." She felt a warm presence behind her and turned to find Tyler watching her with undisguised admiration. "You're amazing with them," he said softly. Julia leaned back against him as his arms encircled her waist. "They make it easy. Children naturally want to learn. The past year had brought changes for both of them. Tyler had successfully restructured his company and foundation, creating a more sustainable balance between work and personal life. Julia had taken on a role as educational consultant for his children's book series, which was now being developed into an animated show about ocean conservation. "Are you ready for tonight?" Tyler asked, his breath warm against her ear. Julia nodded, butterflies dancing in her stomach. Tonight was the official launch of their joint educational initiative, a program that would bring marine science curriculum and resources to schools across the city. "I still can't believe we pulled this together so quickly," she said, watching as the children listened raptly to a marine biologist explaining about seahorses. "That's what happens when you combine your educational expertise with my resources," Tyler replied. "We make a good team." Julia turned in his arms to face him. "The best team," his blue eyes crinkled as he smiled down at her. "Which reminds me, I have something to ask you later." "What's that?" Julia asked, curious. Tyler shook his head, a mischievous glint in his eye. "After the event, it's important." The launch event was held at the aquarium, with educators, city officials, and media all in attendance. Julia gave a speech about the importance of environmental education that received enthusiastic applause, while Tyler announced a substantial grant program to support the implementation of the curriculum in schools throughout Philadelphia. As the event wound down, Tyler led Julia to the central tank where graceful manta rays glided through blue water, their movements hypnotic and peaceful. "So what was this important question?" Julia asked, admiring the gentle giants swimming above them. Tyler took both her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Julia Lopez, when you stepped in to cover that catering shift a year ago, neither of us could have imagined where it would lead. You've changed my life in ways I never expected, teaching me about balance, about what really matters, about true partnership." Julia's heart began to race as Tyler reached into his pocket and lowered himself to one knee. Around them, the remaining event attendees fell silent, watching the scene unfold. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person," Tyler continued, opening a small velvet box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to Julia's eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes," she managed to say through her emotion. "Yes, of course I will." As Tyler slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, applause erupted around them. In that moment, surrounded by the ocean creatures they both worked to protect, with the promise of a shared future stretching before them, Julia marveled at how one simple decision, filling in for a friend's catering shift, had changed the course of her life forever. And as Tyler held her close, whispering promises of love and partnership against her hair, she knew that their story was just beginning, a story not of millionaire and teacher, but of two people who found in each other the perfect balance of passion, purpose, and love.